This is 5 easiest and best ways you can make money through property. The first way you can make money through property is through your residential property, which is the property that you live in. Second way would be to make money through buy-to-let properties. Third way would be to get into serviced accommodation and into hospitality sector. Fourth way would be through commercial property. And the fifth way would be to get into property development.
So the fifth and the most exciting way of making money through property is by far property development. Reason for that is obviously you can leverage your money a lot more than doing a single house or doing buy to let, and the margin of the profits is huge. When we look at development projects, there's typically 2 or 3 types. It's either a refurbishment project, which obviously there's an existing building, you don't need to do anything to the structure, and you're just basically changing the use of the building, say from an old office block into apartments or something like that. The second way is a new build, which is obviously you starting from ground up, and you're building the blocks and finishing it off. And the third way is a mixture of both. So you might have an existing building that, and then you gain planning to add roof extension or side extension or whatever, and add a bit more value to the building. Obviously there's a little bit more risk because obviously it's a bigger project, and say for example if you're buying a house doing up and selling, you only need one buyer, whereas when you're doing a development project, depending on the project, you're typically looking at anywhere between 10 to 50, 100, 200, depending on how big the project is. So you need to find that many buyers. Having said all that, like I said, it's the most exciting way with the highest profit margin. So just to give you a brief example of how it's done and how you can leverage your money and what sort of profit margins you're looking at, I'll take you through an example which we did recently. So what you typically expect is we looked at a building which had planning for a roof extension. The building was priced at 2 million. Now the cost of build was another 2 million, including professional fees and all the other bits which I'll list in the description below. And then obviously the gross development values, or the total price once you've sold all the units, was 6.3 million. So all of a sudden you can see that in a 12-month project, instead of building a house, which takes roughly about pretty much the same time depending on what sort of house you're building, you're basically doubling your money. So you put 2 million into purchase, 2 million into build, and then you got about £2 million profit. Now, why that's a great idea to do a development is you can leverage your money, as I mentioned before. So for that typical example, out of the £2 million that is the purchase price, you can actually raise about 1.4 million through development finance. So basically, if you look at the actual cash in, you're putting in £700,000 into the project, and at the end you're taking £2 million in profit at the end of the project, which is a great return. If you're doubling your money in 12 months, that's a great profit. This is actually, it's even higher than obviously 100% return, which is amazing. Now, the way development finance works is usually they'll pay up to 65-70% of the purchase price, and you can get 100% of the build cost, which is great. So basically your input into a project is 30 to 40% of the purchase price, and that's it. One thing you want to be careful with though, once you take on development finance, the way it usually works is obviously the finance company will have a monitoring surveyor, and then you have an appointed quantity surveyor as well. These two people will liaise with each other, but the finance company will only pay once you've added value to the property. So say for example, if the bill, in this example that we went through, if the building had a roof and you took the roof off, then you've actually devalued the property and they wouldn't pay you any money. So you've got to work it with your contractors so that first of all, they get paid in arrears. Second of all, what you want to do is for stuff like that, so windows, if there's cladding, whatever that needs to go on, you need to order them first, and then when they come, you remove the roof and put the other one on so that you don't devalue the property, and then you can ask for the next stage of payments to be made. So those are the basics of how it's really done, but there's more to it than, you know, just buy the building. There's other bits like when you're buying a building, there's a few factors that you need to take into account, which we've gone through in the first video, which is linked somewhere in this video or in the description. There are factors like location that you need to look at, and this is obviously, you need to look at your market share, so whether you targeting owner occupiers or you targeting investors. If it's the investors that you're targeting, then you need to look at what sort of returns, rental income they're going to get, because that's what they will be driven by. If it's owner occupiers, then other factors, you know, like has it got outdoor space, do they have parking space, there's a lot of factors that you need to take into account, which, you know, if you let us know, we can go through it. It's going to be a whole new video. We can go through it. Just let us know in the comments below, and we'll do another video and go into more detail on every little bit that you need to discuss before you do a development project. So when you do a development project, there's two ways you can build the project. What I would recommend is obviously always use a contractor that has the experience, because obviously that will allow you to raise finance easier, because once the finance company is sure that, you know, your contractor can build this building, then it's easier for them to obviously lend the money. Also, what you want to do is you want to make sure from start you've gone through every last bit of detail. You want to make sure you put them on a contract on a JCT so that they are tied into a time frame and a cost. And obviously you want to give them the full specification. It's worth sitting down with the architect, with the interior designers, come up with the full specification of what you want in the block, and then hand them the specification. That way there's no you know, arguments towards the end of the work, and the finished product is actually what you want. The other factor to consider is sales. Obviously that's going to be your exit in the development project. What we typically do is, obviously, once we've secured everything, finance, contractors, we know exactly when the project is going to be done, you know, everything's on paper, then what we would like to do usually is we launch the project into the market and maybe sell at least 20 to 30% before we actually start work. So we give ourselves a month to 6 weeks to sell some of the units. Obviously, if it's a bigger project, then you can't sell, you can't sell 200 units in a month. But you want to sort of try and get some sales in before you start the work, just as a way of protection for yourself, for the contractors, for the finance people, so that everyone's obviously on the same page. The other thing you want to consider when dealing with finance companies and development finance is so whatever you agree with your contractor with regards to build time and whatever they're happy to sign the contract with, I would usually get 6 to 12 months after that on your terms. So say for example, if the contractor says it's going to be a 12-month build and they're happy to do a JCT based on 12 months, you typically want to get your terms from your finance company for 18 to 24 months, only because we don't know, you can't predict some of the stuff that could happen. For example, something like a pandemic or any possible scenario that could happen that could delay the work, then development finance people would want to be out of the contract by a certain time, and you want to buy that time for starters. If you do that, you obviously will pay a little bit more on your fees at the start, but obviously if you don't take 18 months to complete, then you only pay interest on the months that you've used the money. So I think it's worth de-risking the project in that way as well, just so that you protect yourself and protect the contractors as well. There's pros and cons for all three types. The new build, obviously, typically everyone is aware that the hardest part of doing a new build is coming out of the ground. Once that's done, from then onward, it's pretty easy to do, as everything's on a plan. There's no existing walls or anything to take into consideration. Your electric risers, your dry risers, everything is built and gone up. That's that's the best part of doing a new build. But then obviously you've got the part that you need to get out of ground, which is the hardest part. Refurb projects, the hard part is obviously you're dealing with a lot of existing issues. So for example, if a building was an office block and the soil and the drainage wasn't good enough for residential block, then those are the things that you need to take into consideration. But obviously there's no getting out of ground, the building's already existing. Some of the stuff is easier, but obviously because you're dealing with a lot of existing structures, there might be some issues there. So for example, if there's a retail unit on the ground floor and then you have to sort of liaise with them, go into there and sort out your drainage and stuff. So there are things to take into consideration in both. And in the third one, where there's an existing building and you're doing a new build, you just got to take into account whether foundation is good enough to take the extension, and what sort of system are you going to use, how are you going to marry the new and the old, and how are you going to prevent leaks and stuff like that. Like I said, again, if you wanted to know more in detail about property development, we could go on and on. If you put in the comments below, we do a more detailed video on property development, and we go through every last bit of details that you need. So there you go, guys. This was how you make money through property development. This was fifth and final video in this series. If you haven't watched the other 4 videos, they'll be linked in the description below. Make sure you check them out, as some of the stuff that we refer to in this video will be explained in more detail in the other 4 videos.
Thanks for watching the video. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be notified every time we post a video. If you found this video informative, please give us a like, and if you have any questions, please comment down below, and see you next time.